Of course, so you've come in there, Brent, as you said, to that kind of desert-esque landscape.
Yes.
So talk to me now, kind of 5 months in,
Yeah.
where are we at and what's changed?
Yeah, so great question. What's changed? We've officially gone to market, closed a bunch of business, but most importantly, we understand our velocity to close business and how to do that. We've created a system that helps us do that. We've created everything from platforms to help us get to market, such as sequencing events. We understand that it takes 12 to 18 touch for my team to book a meeting. So how do I solve for that problem? That was a lot of work, right? Those cadences look like phone calls, emails, text messages, social selling. All those things need to come into an ecosystem where we can start to manage that process. So sequencing helps us do that. We stood up a platform to help us. Next, I got to solve the problem. How do I feed that engine and get the data, right, of people who we talk to? So I got to solve for that data set problem through leveraging our data assets like the Zoom Infos of the world. Put that up, installed something like an outreach.io. Up next, we got to build how do we overcome objectives and negatives and build value propositions, cold call scripts, overcoming all these things, cadences, KPIs. Started to develop those in our processes by leveraging past experiences. And then really took the data sets that we had and we understood that previously, before joining and creating this repeatable process, sales took 88 days here at PIN. Well, we wanted to shorten that sales cycle through leveraging those things and understanding how many meetings it takes or our velocity to close business. We've actually shortened that down to about 14 days. So our velocity to close business is anywhere from 14 to 28 days. We've pretty much slashed that by a third. So those are some of the things that we've stood up. We've developed a sales pipeline from 0 to about 15x of where it was. We're going to most likely hit a run rate of like 20 million in ARR in the last 4 months here. So, exciting times for us. Well, but typically here at PIN, I compete against status quo. So status quo would be that pre-COVID world, right? And that pre-pandemic world. Well, good news for me, I compete against that all day long in my sales cycle. And we've had the opportunity to really have eye-opening conversations around competing against those things, against the traditional media sets that are out there by leveraging consumer cycle micro-targeting in my platform, by leveraging data sets and understanding attribution and my modeling through my PIT data technology and WASP systems, where we can get right down to the granular sets where I can find people with a moment of propensity in time. So it's actually been better for us. We're finding that our customers are doing better today than they were post-COVID.
Wow, awesome. So I guess it would be a stretch, though, to say in regards to COVID that you don't want it to come to an end.
I definitely want it to come to an end. I want to get my vacations back and get on planes and feel more comfortable and just get back to a bit of normalcy. I think we've learned a lot of lessons from this. But at the end of the day, sales philosophies here within my organizations have changed. Whether that be the traditional way that we go to market, whether that's knocking on a door, which doesn't happen at these days, especially when we're doing that B2B play and the spaces that we kind of play in, automotive spaces, B2B places in big buildings where we definitely want to meet people. It's been a lot tougher. I think we all have also got some of that Zoom fatigue with being on camera all day as well. It'll be nice to get back to some normalcies. And heck, man, I want to go to a beach and enjoy the heck out of it with my sales team after we go crush 2020. Yeah, the biggest challenges I've faced is just it all boils down to I'm always gonna, and we've said it throughout this entire conversation, is not having a process. And whether that be I'm joining a new organization and I don't understand the technology, so I can't create a process, and I wasn't a good student, or I just wasn't, ready to go out and find the answers myself within an organization, branching out. So the key takeaways for me of overcoming challenges is just really coming from a place of understanding, understanding that if there is a process, what it looks like, what's broken inside of it, and addressing it immediately. If there's ever been an area where I've never been successful, it's just been not addressing a problem or a process quick enough.
Why did they bring me in from a company perspective? I have to give them some credit as well, because obviously going through a growing pandemic, they weren't putting on the brakes as far as go to market. And as you well know, Joe, when you're building out a business, it takes time. And whether you're in a pandemic, maybe an economic downturn, we've all been through those different elements in our careers, or if you haven't been, you will be going through them in some point in your career, of those challenging economic or world times. And I have to give them some credit that they understood that it was going to take some time for us to build out our program, build out our recruitment, build out our channel partners for them to be successful. And as you probably well know, in the cybersecurity space, the pandemic hasn't slowed cybersecurity down. We continue to face challenges. We continue to face attackers. And the cybersecurity landscape is very, very healthy right now. And we're trying to do everything we can to be more proactive on, I will be honest with you about working at an organization. I do look at the women in leadership within that organization. I'm interviewed with several organizations that were 100% men, and there's nothing wrong with that. First of all, but the second point is that as a woman interviewing, you look at that leadership organization, and oftentimes you look and go, that's not a place I'm going to be successful, because there's not the belief or the trust. And I think it comes down to a little bit of trust that they've broken that glass. They've broken that barrier. They've said, no, look, we have, and I don't mean to say this, but I often think there's always a token woman in the leadership role, usually in HR or marketing, one of those two.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that, and then the rest of the leadership, and depending on how big the leadership team is, will often take you back and look and say, no, that's not what I'm not interested in that. And I do find it in pockets. It seems like there's certain pockets around the world that are a little more strong leadership with men versus the women. But that is an element that you do have to ask and question. And I think as women growing up in the cybersecurity business, you have to challenge leadership on why don't they have women in leadership? Why hasn't there been any women on their leadership organization? Why are there no women on their board as leadership in organizations? You look at many venture capitalists; they have women in their organizations, and why is that particular cybersecurity doesn't have any? So I think it's important as women in the organization or women who are looking to go into cybersecurity to actually challenge that as part of your interview process. I think it's I think you will be much happier. I know I have been much happier in my career when I have asked those challenging questions. It doesn't always make a comfortable situation, but I think it's important that if that's something you want, if that's something you want to grow into, if that's something you want to advance to, that you're constantly challenging, and not just because you're a woman, but because you believe you can actually add value to the organization that you are trying to help lead and change going forward.
Absolutely. So obviously now we come to the 1st of May, Mike, you're up and running, heart of, a pandemic. How have those, 4.5 months been?
It's so funny you asked that, because I get asked this a lot. Like, Mike, your timing is terrible. And I have a lot of very close friends. I'm very close with the leadership at my former company. And even they're like, are you sure you don't want to wait a few months? Like, this is the absolute worst time you could be doing it. And I laugh because I started my sales career in 2008. And if you recall, 2008 was the year of the Great Recession. So I thought it was only fitting that if I were to start something new in my career, it had to be during one of the hardest economic times we've ever had. So no, jokes aside, it's I would actually say building a product, this is the best time to do it. It's during times when the economy is a little bit slower, obviously with what's going on in the world. It gives me a good chance to hunker down and build. You know, I don't have any overhead costs. I don't carry much weight as far as commitment and who I have to pay and things like that. So it's not like I'm at a point where I need revenue to sustain overhead. So this is actually the most perfect time to build. So now that the product's done, the economy's starting to get a little bit better. Who knows what will happen in the next few months? But now that things are kind of, budgets are getting formed, people are ready to go. Now my product's ready. So I actually think the timing may have helped me from an entrepreneur building standpoint.
Everything in life is a learning experience, I think. You said you learned a lot from that traffic reporter role, for instance, as you were, just before you were about to start college. So just out of interest, Dave, could you elaborate a bit more on, I guess, what that did teach you and how that has maybe helped you through your career?
Yeah, one of the things about that job, Connor, that was interesting was learning how to pivot when things didn't go so great. The radio station that I went to work for first was called Waxy, and the ratings book came out. That's a period in the fall and the spring when back in the day the rating service, which was called Arbitron in the United States, the big global brands, I guess, are Nielsen and Kantar, but they would send out to the audience a little diary, and you'd have to list what stations you listened to. Waxy didn't do so well. They changed the format. They changed the call letter. They fired the staff, and I realized, wow, this is going to be a tough kind of a job to throughout my life if I want to be a breadwinner and raise a family and have stability. So I loved it. I went over to an all news station called WHAM News and Talk. It was the powerful station. And again, this is pre-internet. This was 1978. So they used to start the mornings by doing the farm report, and they would tell the farmers who were listening from their tractors at 5 a.m. What the price of soybeans was for the day, or apples, or pork bellies. So I felt very honored and lucky to be in that role, and it was right next door to the newsroom where this reporter who worked for UPI, Mark Frank, wrote a story about me being too young to drive an automobile, but telling thousands of drivers how to get to work every day. And then that story came out, and it was in a lot of papers around the country, even some international papers. And I realized, this whole syndication business of telling your story and then distributing it on a network, and then having news editors opt in to run that story was really intriguing. And so that prompted me to go for print journalism to school rather than staying in radio. And as you can see, I have more of a face for radio than TV. I did have hair back in those days, but I made a decision that TV didn't feel comfortable for me. So I think that the lessons learned were kind of just look at the whole environment you're in and the market you're in, and what's happening. Watch the money, watch where the dollars are going or not going, and make decisions and see if you can ride a wave or ride a trend, or get ahead of it, even if you're smart enough to do that.
In your experience, what's the biggest challenge in global expansion? Why do so many companies fail at it?
Well, I think you look at your own expertise and think you know it all, right? And you helicopter into another market, and you find that things operate differently. It's the stuff you learned in school about in sociology class about ethnocentrism, right? So yeah, there is that big American ego that I think we just have to check and realize that we don't necessarily know everything. But there's also just capitalization, and it's just realizing, not to put the cart ahead of the horse. Make sure that you've got the financing to take care of your team well, and to take care of your existing clients well, and to just to keep running the operation professionally, and making sure that you're getting great renewals and servicing the customer before you get too diluted knowing that, you know, I must grow, I must grow, I must grow. And then suddenly you find yourself, well, I wish I had 3 more service people because, you know, our renewal rate has slipped because we got, you know, stars in our eyes about growing our business over in Australia or somewhere. So I think it's just logical and you know, slow and steady wins the race.
You know, so many tech startups out there. They have these big ambitions of growing, of, you know, having an IPO, whatever it is. Obviously, very few actually get there. So, where do you think, amongst all that, where do most get it wrong, or maybe don't do it as well? Where do you think that sometimes falls down for a lot of companies?
I think where that falls down for a lot of tech startups now, in particular, is that they kind of fall in love with their product and what their product is and its features and its functions and things like that. And what I was saying before, where if you're not able to somehow be able to communicate or convey to whoever it is you think is your customer or your target customers and things like that, it becomes really difficult for them to make the translation or the linkage between what your stuff is and how it helps them. And that is the one thing that, you know, I used, or I didn't use, but I mentioned before that, you know, I was part of some startups that had some really awesome technology, right? Probably the best technology for their particular market segment. But there's kind of a thing that I've learned over the years is that best technology rarely wins in the startup world, right? The ones that win are the ones that are able to make that linkage between what the customer's problems are, the business problems they're trying to solve at a high level, and how it is that they solve for that. As I use the term, solve for the customer, as opposed to you're sitting here solving for product market fit. Product market fit is important when you're kind of going through that stage of the innovative type of customers and or the you know, early adopter type of customers and things like that. But once you get, you know, to product market fit, then it becomes a case of how are you solving for the customer, and then that way you'll get much more rapid adoption and thus more revenues.
Definitely, that's good. I like it. Okay. Well, there's one thing I wanted to ask you actually. We're kind of running towards the end, and over the years that I've helped you grow your teams, candidates I speak to always tell me that you ask them very tough questions at interview, and some real kind of deep thinkers. So I'd like to know what is it you ask these people? What are some of your favorite questions to ask in an interview that really help you assess if that person's right, and why do you ask those questions? So let's have an example.
Okay, well let me. So I'll tell you why I asked the question. So and you just kind of hit on it, which is, you know, when I'm speaking with candidates, you know, we have our interview process and that sort of thing, and I usually will trust that the hiring managers or, you know, other people that have referred them or the recruiters or whatever it happens to be, right, are asking them the questions around how did they accomplish this, or what did they accomplish, or how do they do whatever their task is or role is or whatever happens. So how and the what questions, right? What I try to do is I try to get at the why, because what I've learned over doing this for a number of companies and a number of years is that inevitably it's more about the why as to whether somebody's going to be successful or not, as opposed to the what they did or how, you know, what they accomplished or how they did it. And so that's kind of how I put together, you know, I'll call it the list of questions that I'm asking. So I'll ask questions, I mean, in addition to things like, you know, hey, what do you think you're really good at professionally or something like that? But I ask them to give me a lot of things, not just like 3 or 4. So but I'll ask things like, you know, so if you were suddenly to, you know, come across a windfall of money to where you were quote unquote financially independent, right? You know, and I use the example of if you happen to have a lottery in your city or your county or your country or whatever it is, you know, if you won that, and then I just ask the question, I just simply say, well, what would you do? And then just let them go fire away, right? Or I'll ask questions like, hey, if you had the opportunity to speak to 5 individuals at any time in the history of the world, whether it's the past, it's the present, or the future, who would they be and why? And so, because it's not so much, I'm not really looking for, well, who was it, right, type of thing, because you can get all sorts of answers to that one. But it's more about the why. Why is it that you would want to speak to that person? Or why is it that if you have all of a sudden we're financially independent, why is it, what is it that you would want to be doing and why? So those are a couple examples of the questions that I ask, and then there's several others, but it'll probably take a long time to get through all.